The braziers had been left to burn out in the Great Pyramid's grand throne room. Nearly 4 hours past midnight, they gave off a sullen red glow that lent the chamber an ominous, blood-hued cast. The ruddy light scarcely reached above head height along the towering stone columns and pooled on the broad steps of the great dais. Silence stretched through the chamber's chill air, broken only by the furtive sounds of burrowing tomb beetles. Then there was a faint sound like the whispers of skin across stone, a thin hissing that nearly resolved into words. Dark forms moved in the shadows beyond the columns on the north side of the room. The sibilant whispers rose again, like a conversation between a trio of vipers. Then a lithe shape glided from the darkness and stepped into the center of the throne room. Pale hands reached up and pulled back a black cotton hood, revealing the sharp-edged features of Ashniel, the Druchii witch. She turned slowly in place, as though trying to deduce where the chamber was in relation to the rest of the huge pyramid, and how close she might be to freedom. Within moments, Ashniel was joined by her companions. Drutheira had her hood back, letting her white hair tumble across her narrow shoulders. Her ethereal beauty had been transformed into a tight mask of strain, and she clutched an improvised dagger chipped from a broken shard of obsidian. Malchior limped along in her wake, cursing softly under his breath. The shaft of a barbed dart jutted from the Druchii's left thigh, and every step left a small pool of blood gleaming upon the marble. Clearly, Ashniel's mastery of the crypt's many traps still left something to be desired. The three Druchii came together and whispered once more, clearly arguing about which way they should go. Then a cold voice echoed from the darkness, transfixing them with its predatory intensity. "You are very close," Nagash said from the darkness surrounding the ebon throne. Cloth whispered against stone as the necromancer rose to his feet and slowly descended the steps into the ruddy light. In his left hand he held the Staff of Ages, and his dark eyes were intent upon the barbarians. Nagash smiled, a gesture devoid of warmth or humor. "Shall I tell you which direction to go?" he asked, pointing to the doorway at the far end of the hall. "When the spirit of the dead king was judged and accepted into paradise, he could leave the Great Pyramid and travel to the afterlife. So the architects built a long, sloping corridor there to facilitate his passage." Ashniel gave Nagash a look of purest hate. "A pity that a spirit has no need for an actual door," she hissed. "The passageway is purely symbolic and ends at a stone wall." She drew herself to her full height and sneered at the necromancer. "I've spent a great deal of time reading about your people's bizarre burial rites." Nagash inclined his head mockingly. "The passage awaits, witch. All that stands between you and your freedom is me." He spread his arms expansively. "Defeat me with your sorceries, and you may go free." Malchior took a limping step towards the dais. "What kind of trick is this?" He spat, but the movement was nothing more than a feint. Quicker than the eye could follow, the warlock threw up his hands and hissed a stream of liquid syllables that caused the air to crackle with magical power. Nagash reacted without hesitation, bringing around the Staff of Ages and chanting an abjuration just as a bolt of blue-white light shone from Malchior's hand. The destructive spell leapt at Nagash. Then it seemed to unravel midway to its target as it encountered the necromancer's counterspell and dissipated with a thunderous crack. As the ragged tendrils of sorcerous energy washed over him, Nagash switched tactics, thrusting his open hand forwards and barking out the spell. There was a flash of heat, and darts of glimmering fire stitched the air between the necromancer and the Druchii. The barbarians scattered, deflecting the magical bolts with counterspells. The darts etched molten craters in the marble flagstones and blew fragments from the towering stone columns that flanked the throne room. Ashniel circled to Nagash's left, spitting out a blasphemous incantation and hurling a bolt of hissing blackness from her open hands. Nagash turned it aside with another quick counterspell. It struck the Staff of Ages and deflected past the necromancer with a thunderous roar, striking the ebon throne of Usirian. Malchior struck Nagash a moment later, hitting the necromancer in the side with a spear of crackling energy. Nagash, still focusing on his counterspell, was able to dissipate most of its power, but the rest of the spell's energy raked across his ribs like a lion's claw and set his robes ablaze. The necromancer staggered. With a roar, he barked a stream of syllables. The fire licking at his robes guttered and went out, channeled into a whipcord of flames that he unleashed upon Ashniel. The witch severed the stream of energy with contemptuous ease. Suddenly, a storm of whirling shadows surrounded Nagash. A pale figure emerged from the darkness, appearing to dance past the necromancer, and fiery pain tore through his arm. Nagash whirled. Drutheira was already out of reach, vanishing into the magical darkness with a hateful laugh. Blood poured down on his arm from a gash left by the witch's dagger. The air in the chamber quivered with a crash and roar of sorcerous power. Another bolt of power tore through Drutheira's cloak of shadows, and Nagash felt his entire left side explode in pain as the spell grazed his hip. It spun him around like a child's toy, nearly pitching him from the dais. He landed hard on his right side, sparing him from a stream of crackling darts flung by Ashniel. Nagash bit back the pain that clawed at his nerves and tried to collect his wits. The Druchii were far more experienced with sorcery than he was, but he thought that without raw magic, the winds of magic, as they called it, to draw on, he would be able to counter their spells with ease. Clearly, the barbarians hadn't shared everything they knew. Nagash, however, possessed secrets of his own. Once more, the inky shadows closed in around him. The necromancer abandoned his counterspells and clutched the staff with both hands, watching for a telltale flicker of pale skin. Drutheira seemed to dance through the darkness towards him, approaching Nagash from the side. He let her draw close, and then lashed out at her with his staff. The witch saw the blow coming and tried to leap aside, but the necromancer caught her right ankle and caused her to stumble. She fell with a screech, rolling painfully down the stone steps of the dais. As she fell, Nagash rose to one knee and barked out a counterspell that scattered the shadows like smoke. His throat was tight and painful, and his body was starting to tremble from strain. Immediately, he felt a sense of pressure against his skin, and he brandished the Staff of Ages in front of him as bolts of power struck him from the front and the side. Claws of fire tore at the side of Nagash's face, and he was deafened by twin concussions that hammered at his body. Agonizing pain lanced into his chest as though iron fingers tore deep into the flesh and muscle beneath his skin. For a dizzying instant, Nagash wavered on the edge of unconsciousness. He clawed his way back by sheer force of will and sought out the wounded figure of Malchior, still standing at the center of the throne room. Clenching his right fist, the necromancer began to chant. Nagash knew that the barbed spike in the warlock's leg was tainted with poison, a painful, debilitating venom that was even now coursing through the Druchii's veins. Somehow, the warlock was able to continue fighting, despite the agony of the poison. But now, the necromancer enhanced its virulence tenfold. The Druchii stiffened in mid-chant, his muscles tightening like cables beneath his skin. Foam burst from the warlock's mouth, and he toppled over and began to writhe across the catered stone, until a flurry of searing bolts from the necromancer's fingers tore the Druchii's body open like knives. Boiling blood spattered across the floor, and the warlock's flayed body stilled. Nagash wasn't finished with Malchior yet. he tasted blood as he spat the incantation of reaping and consumed the warlock's soul. Malchior's life essence flowed to him like a river of ice, banishing the pain of his wounds and filling his veins with power. Drutheira lay at the foot of the dais, doubled over in pain. She had landed on her right arm, which was bent at an awkward angle. With a snarl, Nagash jabbed a finger at her and spat a vicious spell. The witch threw up her good arm and screamed a counterspell, but the force of the necromancer's attack struck her like a desert storm. Drops of blood appeared on the witch's pale skin, spreading rapidly as her flesh was stripped away in twisting ribbons by furious magical winds. In the blink of an eye, the witch was shredded. Once again, Nagash chanted the incantation of reaping and ate the barbarian's life essence. A bolt of searing power smashed into the necromancer, but Nagash scarcely felt it. The energy dissipated like smoke, cancelled by the inrush of power from Drutheira's soul. Turned to Ashniel, who still stood near the chamber's southern wall, and unleashed a rippling string of magical bolts. The witch countered his attacks with fearsome speed, deflecting many of the bolts and dissipating the rest. Crackling detonation split the stone and sent puffs of dust into the air around the Druchii, but Ashniel was unharmed. With a screech, the witch struck back. Nagash felt the days beneath him start to shift and give way. He focused his will on the stones, which were turning black and melding together like the maw of a gaping pit. The necromancer barked a counterspell and poured his newly gathered energies into the incantation, fixing the stones once more into solidity. Before Ashniel could launch another attack, Nagash unleashed another torrent of bolts at the witch. Once again, she deflected them with almost casual skill. More concussions reverberated across the chamber, sending razor-sharp flecks of stone whickering through the air. Ashniel staggered beneath the onslaught, but she gave the necromancer a malicious smile. "A clever trick, human," she shouted, "but those two were amateurs compared to me. Your attacks are potent, but clumsy, and your energies are finite. I can counter your spells indefinitely, and when you have exhausted yourself, I will make a new pair of gloves from your hide." Nagash's face twisted in rage, and he began to chant again. A wild, howling wind rushed from the necromancer, roaring down the dais towards the witch. Ashniel threw up her hands, and the wind curled around her. The flagstones beneath her feet erupted into fragments, and the sharp echoes of splintering stone filled the air. "You see," she said with a laugh, "your spells can't touch me." Nagash drew a deep breath. The power of the Druchii souls was fading, leaving his throat feeling raw and torn. "What makes you think that spell was meant for you?" he croaked. Ashniel's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed warily. With a hiss like an angry cat, she whirled to see the cracked and splintered feet of Asaph, goddess of love. Baffled, she spun back to Nagash, just as the head of the goddess landed on her. Nagash uttered the incantation of reaping one last time and drank deep of Ashniel's life essence. Pain faded, replaced by the cold bliss of triumph. The necromancer surveyed the scene of carnage. Veils of dust hung in the air, tinged red by the banked light of the braziers. "My thanks for the lesson," Nagash said with a smile.